For so many people, it just seems perfectly obvious. We're not going to be able to fix this until we first acknowledge that there's a problem.
Do we want to continue as we are? Or do we want to have a rethink and change the way we do things? One of the issues with the sea is that it's sort of out of sight, out of mind in terms of what is happening beneath the surface of the sea. When we look at land and we see deforestation and things like that, there's a clamour, there's a hue and cry about what's happening. But most people don't know what's going on in the sea. We tend to forget that 70% of the planet is the sea. It's absolutely essential for the functioning of all ecosystems, and we treat it like a trash pit. You know, we extracted most of the fish out of it, we dump sewage in it, we dredge the sea bottom, we treat it with such disrespect, forgetting how important it is for all of our survival. And out here, things have changed a lot in the last 40 years, really. Divers will tell you, in the 1970s around here, it looked like the Red Sea. It was certainly as biodiverse. But now, it's really gone. If we were to look ahead, do we want to continue as we are? In which case biodiversity is collapsing, or do we want to have a rethink and change the way we do things and put biodiversity at the forefront of everything? Is it great? Oh, lyrics. We can all dance.
I like it.
It's nice. My name's Danny Renton, and I run a charity called Sea Wilding, which is all about marine habitat restoration. My connection to this part of Scotland goes right back to year zero, really, when I used to come up here for 2 months every summer and stay on the island of Tiree, where my family has a long connection. And in that time, all over the last sort of 56 years, I have seen the seas change. Here on the west coast of Scotland, it was one of the richest fisheries in the world. And certainly when I was a kid, there were lots of trawlers tied up in the local port of Oban. And it used to employ hundreds of thousands of people. In the neighbouring Loch Fyne, in the early 1800s, there were 500 big herring boats. Now, there are virtually none. All those fishing boats have gone. And what we're doing now is we're just fishing at the bottom of the food chain. We've just got dredging, bottom trawling, and creels for crabs and lobster. And basically that's a reflection of really terrible fisheries management over the last 150 years, but especially over the last 40 years, which is when the inshore limit was lifted and these very, very destructive practices of raking the seabed with 2-ton dredges for scallops, a single species, was allowed to happen close inshore. And if you accept that it's these shallow coastal areas, which are the fish nurseries and the fish spawning grounds, if you come in with a massive bit of steelwork and just scrape along the bottom repeatedly, you destroy all that biodiversity and you destroy the spawning grounds, and hence a big collapse in fish stocks. And that's what's been happening since 1984. And it's really why there are so few fishing jobs left. I started Sea Wilding, and the idea of it was rather than just campaigning against things, trying to get things stopped, like sort of poor fishing practice or things like that, was to try and get the community involved in actively putting things back in again that have gone. And so we're looking at seagrass and native oysters. A 100 years ago, you'd have seen seagrass everywhere around the UK coastline, especially in the estuarine areas. It was really, really commonplace and a really important part of the ecosystem. Seagrass does two things. Firstly, it filters the water and sequesters carbon, so all that matter floating through the water gets trapped in the seagrass and then drops down into the root system. And then it's also the only flowering plant in the ocean, so it's photosynthesizing, so it's drawing carbon down into the root system. And then it's effectively the root systems, they're called rhizomes. It's a dense mass of roots. And they become very, very deep, and it becomes basically like peatland. It becomes a carbon sink, which, left undisturbed, locks away carbon for thousands of years. So it's firstly really important in terms of climate change. The second thing it does is it is a really important fish nursery and spawning ground. When you swim through a seagrass meadow, it's like swimming through a wildflower meadow. It's full of life. If you come off it and the seabed is dead, there's nothing really going on. So there's much more life in a seagrass meadow. So what we're trying to do, and this is a research project, because no one really has managed to crack restoring seagrass at scale, what we're doing here is trialling different methodologies by which we can plant seagrass here and see what works best. So we've planted around 1/4 hectare so far. This year we'll plant another 1/4 hectare. We're trialling lots of different methodologies, and we have about 80 hectares here where we believe that we can bring back seagrass, potentially.
I want it on record that I was stopped halfway through, so I would have got at least double that.
I noticed there was a large stone in there.
I reckon it's smashed there.
So we've just come back, and our team have been out harvesting seagrass seed in one of the meadows here at Loch Regnish. And this bag probably has around sort of 5,000 seeds, more or less. And you can see them. This is the biomass. The seeds are embedded like grains of rice in the leaves of seagrass. And what we do next is we take this back to our boathouse, back to the tanks in the boathouse, and we empty it in, and then it all rots away, and the seed drops to the bottom, and then we extract it, and then in a few months' time, we plant it. Well, what we're trying to do here is show that we can manage as a community this loch in a different way to what's happened in the past. We want to try and work together with all the other actors and players in the sea loch with a mutual goal to try and improve biodiversity and the health of the sea loch. That's the goal. But effectively, we're creating a different management system for a sea loch which puts biodiversity and health of the water at the forefront of everything. And then if we can do that here, we could potentially roll it out around Scotland, which is what we're trying to do, is train other communities to do the same.
My name's Ailsa McClellan, and my background is in marine science. I've worked with inshore fishermen a lot, helping them get a voice in government, and I have worked as coordinator for the Our Seas Coalition, which is a coalition of many Scottish businesses, charities, NGOs, who are all calling for the reinstatement of an inshore limit on trawling and dredging. So the 3-mile limit was put in almost 100 years before 1984, which was when it was removed. It was put in place because fishermen at that time realised that this newfangled, kind of industrialised bottom trawling was damaging fish stocks. So it was put in place as a conservation method, and it worked. The 3-mile limit was removed because of pressure from the fishing industry. The government were already completely unable to police the limit, so some boats were coming in and fishing anyway inside of that limit. But also, fish stocks were crashing outside of 3 miles because of mismanagement out there. So the fishermen wanted access to these really rich inshore fishing grounds. As this paper on it says, the trawl closure within 3 nautical miles of the coast was repealed in 1984 under pressure from the industry. Thereafter, bottom fish landings went into terminal decline, with all species collapsing to zero or near zero landings by the early 21st century. So that's a pretty unequivocal tale of woe. Scotland's seabed is its greatest carbon sink. Our marine mud alone, which is where the nephrops live that are trawled, that stores more carbon than all of Scotland's terrestrial peat, forestry and soils combined. And that needs protected, obviously, especially given the state we're in. And we're not looking forward to the threat of climate change anymore, we're in it. And we're still getting consultations out. I was filling out one for the biodiversity strategy today, saying we're going to do something about it by 2045. I mean, the time is now. The time was decades ago, and we can't keep kicking this issue into the long grass. Yeah. I get
the long grass.
I get really angry doing consultation. So this isn't just impacting the environment, it's also impacting the fishermen themselves and decreasing their ability to make a living. Unless we see real changes soon, we're going to have very few fishermen left in Scotland and an even more depleted industry than we already have.
Permission to board, sir?
Yeah, go on, yeah, come on.
Thank you.
All right, Elsa. All right, go on, we're going to sneak in the hut this time, like, you're not getting away without it. My name's Bally Philp. I'm a commercial fisherman working from the Isle of Skye. I've been fishing most of my life, off and on since I was 15 years old. And I'm now nearly 50, so I've at least 30 years full-time fishing and a few other jobs in between. The whole fishing industry really has changed in the time that I've been in the fishing industry. So when I started going out with my grandfather's boat and my father's boats, they were catching demersal finfish. And those sort of species that they were once catching are now effectively commercially extinct in the inshore. And the whole of the Scottish fishing industry is now catching shellfish. That's what I myself catch. And it's a very different world now to the world that it was even 30 or 40 years ago. Creel fishing comes in a lot of varieties. These are prawn creels. You get crab creels, lobster creels, wrasse creels, shrimp creels. So a creel is generally a pot or a cage or a trap that holds some bait and has an entrance that's easier to get in than out. The idea is you leave the bait and trap on the seabed. It doesn't move around, it just gets left there, and hopefully the creatures come to the trap. The beauty of that is it does very little damage to the seabed. The process of catching the animals is often highly selective because the trap is designed around the animal. And then when you haul the trap, it doesn't drag along the seabed to any real extent. So the seabed, apart from the area that the trap is sat on for a night, hasn't been touched at all. The difference between that and trawling, which is the other way to catch these same species, is that the trawler will drag a very wide and heavily weighted net over the seabed, and that will disturb a huge area of seabed in the process. And so the difference is quite remarkable. Although we're both fishing for the same creature, the difference between trawling and creeling for catching prawns is remarkable when it comes to the amount of seabed that's impacted and the degree of that impact.
I've never seen this happen in all my days.
I was once a crew.
Yeah, before my time.
Before you were even born.
Like.
Before I met your mother. So the Irish Seas Coalition and the Scottish Creel Fishermen's Federation, who's a member of the Irish Seas Coalition, have these 3 acts that we think will make all the difference. So that's an inshore limit, and that's like a version maybe of the old-fashioned 3-mile limit, or basically restrictions on where trawlers and dredgers can work inshore. And then in those sort of zones that you would create, these low-impact zones, you create a preferential access for low-impact fisheries. Now, what that means is that those people who have got the best credentials get the first rights to fish in these places. They don't get displaced by more efficient but heavier impact gears. So we've got low-impact fishing zones, and then we've got preferential access for low-impact fishers. And then lastly, we want vessel tracking. And the vessel tracking is so that we can police these things. We can make sure the high-impact fishers aren't sneaking in at night, and we can make sure that the low-impact fishers are really behaving in a low-impact way. One of the most frustrating things about this whole fisheries management and all the issues and the complexities is that for so many people, it just seems perfectly obvious. I mean, the graphs show the declines in fish landings, the harbour show the declines in fish landings, what's in your net shows the declines in fish landings, and most of us agree that there's a really big problem here. But the most important people don't agree, and that is the government and the civil servants that work with the government. They actually think that there's nothing wrong. So in my mind, and in mind of most of the people that I work with, there's a kind of environmental, social, economic and environmental catastrophe going on here. And in the minds of the government and the bureaucrats, this is just business as usual. And that frustrates me more than anything else, because we're not going to be able to fix this until we first acknowledge that there's a problem.
The problem about fisheries management to date is that sustainability doesn't feature. It's a race to the bottom, really. And we see that. Fish stocks are collapsing. Most of them have collapsed. We're now fishing on the west coast at the bottom of the food chain for all that's left. And if we were to look ahead, the ideal would be that we manage things differently. And sustainability is at the forefront of everything. So with good science, we try to recover fish stocks. And we, in the future, if they do recover, we manage them sustainably. So there's biodiversity and there are opportunities to fish. If we continue like this, there won't be.
So I've got two boys. I don't think I'd really like either of them to go into fishing. I mean, they've both done their maritime courses, so they're capable of going into the fishing if they want to. But really, unless we can turn the fishing industry around and make it an industry worth being in, I mean, who would want to hand their children a dying industry?
If we want to eat fish in the future, we have to look at where it comes from and whether it is sustainably harvested. And we have to sort of open up our eyes to the destruction of what we've done. And we have to be much more respectful of the sea. If we wanted biodiversity to survive in the future, we have to manage it much, much better.